Not surprising that Vladimir Putin is sympathetic to the Arab side of the issue with Israel. Why he's suddenly turning on Israel is predictable. He's doing calculus. He sees the United States is for Israel, so he's against Israel. He's for the Arab uprising, even though he doesn't want to have any Arab uprising at home. What we're looking at now are the BRICS nations all anticipating America's $100 billion additional funding for Ukraine, getting involved with Israel, while our own debt crisis continues to metastasize in a $2 trillion a year default. What's going to happen to the American economy? Can we sustain ourselves as the global police force? What's actually happening in the Middle East? These are the reasons why I urge people to go to lancewallnau.com/Birch and position yourself and your family, position your IRA and your retirement in a boat that will float. Gold, silver, there are always investments that sustain value when dollars fluctuate. And we're surely in a period of time where the dollar and its instability is not the place to park your future. You want to go to lancewallnau.com/Birch, download the special report, talk to one of our advisors, and find out what you can do to position yourself to have peace of mind in the potential coming shaking in the United States. But have no fear, my friends. God is in control of all these things, and we're going to see how that scenario is going to play out to the advancement of the kingdom of God in this coming segment. Let's go right in there. All right, real quick here, I want to share one thing before I go into these lies. It's really important. What's going on with the Arab nations right now? That, remember, the Abraham, of course, Trump not only advanced the moving of the embassy, he took out Soleimani, who was the mastermind general behind all of the terror activity of Hamas, Hezbollah, the attacks against the American embassy in Iraq, etc. Trump took him out. He basically, and this guy was responsible for the devices that were planted in the roads that killed and maimed 300 American soldiers' lives. So he's clearly a bad dude, but Iran never forgave Trump and the United States for taking out their leader, their terror linchpin. And so what you're seeing is the revenge of Iran. They really want war. And we could go into the theology of the Iranian, Muslim position regarding the emergence of their Messiah, which they believe cannot emerge until the world is in a state of absolute chaos. And in the midst of the chaos, the ultimate imam, the ultimate Messiah who is called to rule the world will emerge and come up as a solution to the chaos. And this all falls into, strangely enough, end-time teaching on the central character who is the anti-Christian historic figure or the Antichrist. But without going there, right now, what you could see in Saudi Arabia was about to enter into this historic peace with Israel. Iran recognized that its influence and legitimacy in the world would be shut down if Israel continues to gain this legitimacy in the Middle East with peace accords with Bahrain and Egypt and with Saudi Arabia. So Iran had to do what it had to do in order to create such an offense that it would be so unforgivable, so grotesque in its proportions, Israel would have no choice but to come back. Now, Hamas doesn't mind putting people in as human shields, put their artilleries in schools, hospitals, and mosques, so that when the strike back comes from Israel, they can inflame the press with Israel's shooting civilians, Israel's shooting mosques, to inflame the Arab world into uprising. And you could see how insidious this is, how demonic, really, satanically ingenious it is, because it pushes all the buttons that can go at a deeper, more primitive level of aggression and animalistic retaliation. And you're seeing the first wave of that without justification. I mean, poor Israel gets raped, beaten up, burned alive, and shot, and already you see all the pro-Palestinian people on the streets cheering. Imagine what's going to happen when Israel starts its clearing out of the Gaza tunnels of the Hamas military. What I want to say is, and this is very important, is that on the front page, you're seeing, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, these countries, Jordan, saying, warning Israel about what they're about to do. They have to do that because they have to deal with the street riots and the crazies in their own country, the extremists. Behind the scenes, they're hoping Israel is able to clean out Hamas, because Hamas, they recognize, is a disruptive terror cell that doesn't serve the interests of regional stability or economic development. They exist for one thing, like a suicide bomber, and that's blowing up the aircraft. So they're hoping Israel can do what it's got to do. And understand one other thing, which is in some news sources, it's very important for you to be appraised of. And that is that Israel suffered a serious loss of prestige in this attack, which is why I do not subscribe to the idea that they allowed themselves to get, attacked like this for some ulterior motive. In the Middle East, they've been looked up to for the past decade as the ones who could take on Iran on almost a daily basis. They could contribute to the defeat of ISIS. The Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF, have operated in almost every corner of the Middle East with phenomenal success. Therefore, everyone from Cairo to Amman, Abu Dhabi, Riyadh, Beirut, and Tehran is raising eyebrows at the show of vulnerability of Israel. Are they still a regional superpower, or have they gotten weak? For that reason, you better believe Israel is going to engage this thing with such intensity. That's the only reason why they've been holding off so far. Making sure making sure they've got themselves coordinated properly with the United States, because when they go in, the news cycle is going to be inflamed. If there are terrorist cells, as we anticipate with our open border, you're going to see the terrorist cells activated in the West at the moment of the invasion. So there's a lot riding here, but Israel has to recover its prestige as a military force. For that reason, we have to pray that this is contained from spilling over into a larger than regional engagement, so that it doesn't suddenly become Israel outside of Hamas and potentially Hezbollah in the north, which is reluctant really to take this fight. You'll notice that the Hezbollah has not been supporting Hamas in terms of joint action so far. There's been an almost ominous silence in the Secretary of the state, Hassan Nasrallah, who is speaking on behalf of Lebanon, hasn't said much because he's expected to be supporting Hamas in the south with an equally aggressive assault in the north. The reason why they're reluctant to engage is because, apart from launching thousands of rockets and precision-guided missiles and drones at certain strategic targets, they don't want to really engage a land war. They don't want to really engage an invasion. And Mercedes is largely because of 2006, when they killed 3 Israeli soldiers and took 2 and kidnapped 2, the response of Israel was 34 days of bombing and flattening out Beirut. And they remember that because Israel had to send a message that we won't have proportional response. We can't afford it in the Middle East. We have to have overwhelming response in order to discourage terrorizing our citizens. So that's the reason why so far I am not certain about how Hezbollah plans on engaging this, but they have to certainly wait until Israel is fully engaged in the south before they do anything. But this can spin out of control very quickly. I want to go to Ben Shapiro now, because I promised you I was going to cover a couple of lies. The 3 big lies the West tells itself about Israel and Hamas. Ben, go ahead and share.
Myth number 1. Israel is historically Muslim territory. This is a pure and absolute lie. Israel is historically Jewish territory. According to the Bible and certain interpretations of contemporaneous archaeology, Joshua entered the land of Israel in 1400 BC. The Kingdom of David was founded around 1000 BC. The first Temple of Solomon was built in approximately 957 BC. The Second Temple was built in approximately 515 BC. The Hasmonean dynasty was founded in 166 BC. Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 BC, and the Jews exiled from Israel in 136 CE after the defeat of the Bar Kokhba revolt. The Romans, in an attempt to shame the Jews, renamed the area Palestine as an insult after the Jews' historic enemy, the Philistines. Even during the exile, there was continuous Jewish presence in the land. Islam, which is the religion of the Palestinian Arabs, was not even founded until the 7th century CE or AD. No independent Arab state has ever existed in the area known as Palestine.
No, I want to emphasize this. What really shocked me was the discovery that the Palestine is actually a derivation of the word Philistine, because it goes right back to the battle of Israel against the Philistines. And Gaza, the area where they occupy right now, was the capital and stronghold of the Philistine people. So it's really odd to me that as you go through 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years worth of cycles of history, you're up against the same historic principalities, territories, and now the Philistines are again coming up against Judah and Israel. And Daniel, if you remember this, actually had wrestled in prayer with the Prince of Persia, which is the modern day Iran. That principality evidently is a character within the Bible narrative that's already been there. But this idea that this territory has always been, Muslim can't be possibly true, because, as he says, Islam didn't exist till 700 AD. Meanwhile, I just gave you prophecy from Jesus regarding what would happen to Jerusalem. This idea that Israel has to be warned not to engage in human rights violations is something which is additionally, troublesome to me, because what I want to say is that by all rights, the entire political and media infrastructure should be focusing all their moral persuasion now on the human rights issue, convincing Hamas to release hostages and to allow their own citizens to get the heck out of there. They're holding their citizens captive. They want citizen casualties. And instead of the pressure in the media being on the Hamas to let go, they've got 100, this is interesting, nobody's talking about it. They have 100 Americans that are still in Gaza that can't get out. Wow. Are they 100 hostages of Iran? We know that we have over, 150 or so Jewish hostages that are being held. And I believe they're being held in these locations and in the tunnels. Guarantee they're in the tunnels, because that's when the land invasion happens, they'll be fighting above, but the goal is to get below. There'll be booby traps in these tunnels. They're probably thinking of gassing the Jews when they get down there. You're going to see how they're using Americans as hostages and Jews as hostages, and you're not seeing the proportional coverage of the press discussing human or humanitarian rights for those people that are being held hostage. They should be released. Why isn't the press talking about that? It's a strange silence. So we're going to come back. I want to hit this next big lie as Shapiro covers it. We'll be right back. Hey, let's take a moment right here and talk about something. These programs are actually paid for by sponsors. And so the one thing that I always do is try to pick the sponsors that have the greatest value. Those are the ones that I myself believe in. Now, the Birch Gold Group is one of those key sponsors, and I'll tell you why. The economy is the area that I'm the most concerned about in terms of instability in the future. Do you know that right now, China and Russia and India is meeting with Saudi Arabians and South Africans to create an alternative economy, to basically crush the dollar? This is going to have a massive effect on the stock market, on real estate. It'll be a real shaking. But you don't have to be shaken, because there's a way you can protect your retirement, your 401ks, your IRAs, by connecting them in with gold. Gold is unique in history in that it's a place of stored value. In fact, those BRICS nations of Brazil and Russia, India and China, they're going to be backing themselves with, guess what? Gold. So be smart. I want you to go to lancewallnau.com/Birch and get a free information kit. Get knowledge, act quickly, don't wait. And they're going to be able to help you make a great decision on what to do. Remember, that information is free with no strings attached. Do it now, lancewallnau.com/Birch. All right, here's our final segment. I can't believe time goes by so fast, but let's get right into this this powerful idea that there's a solution to this problem. Obama, who gave us the gift of ISIS, by the way. You guys remember ISIS? It's amazing how we were dealing with beheadings, people on the beaches getting their heads cut off, and Obama having to go trot out in front of a microphone and defend himself, saying, people say that the American military is just doing pinprick operation. The American military does not do pinpricks. They were only doing pinpricks under Obama. And ISIS was able to really reconfigure the Middle East, send millions of refugees swarming into Europe, started the refugee crises there. It's like some demon that wants to destabilize, functional civilization by forcing the borders open to assimilate anybody, whether they fit or not, within the culture of where they're going. And now Europe is dealing with the aftermath of that. But that was an Obama legacy. That was the Orange Spring and the feckless and inefficient methodology of Obama managing, which gave birth to ISIS. But what put an end to ISIS? Within 6 months, you didn't hear any more about ISIS. Why? Because Trump basically took the military and said, take them out, destroy them. That's it. They're over. And within 6 months, ISIS wasn't even a conversation. We were too busy talking about Russian collusion to talk about ISIS. Mm-hmm. But here they are again. And Mercedes, you make an interesting point. Why is it that when progressive leftists are in power?
Yeah. It's lawlessness. You get just ungodly lawlessness. Thing like we're seeing right now in Israel, right? It's rape and violence that it's unimaginable to your everyday average person. But we saw it under Obama, and I'm just listening to you talk under the break. I was like, now here we are again. We've got Biden in office. Here we are again, and we've got violent
ISIS
Muslims.
2.0.
Yeah, exactly.
We got ISIS again. All right, so people can argue about that. They can say under Bush we had 9/11, but again.
We know what we know about Bush now, but I mean.
Yeah, well, now we know about the industrial war complex. There are certain people that like these wars. Mm-hmm. They like to have the $100 billion allocation now, because now we can go to Ukraine and Israel. Where we really ought to be focusing on is our own border right now and Israel, not Ukraine. But let's go ahead. Let's grab what Ben has to say, because I don't want to lose this segment. Two-state solution.
A contemporaneous British report on the first chairman of the Palestine Liberation Organization.
One of the most extreme anti-Israeli politicians in the Arab world, Ahmed el-Shukeri, the leader of the Palestine Liberation Organization. As the spokesman for 1 million Palestine refugees, he's fanned the flames of hatred for Israel with unflagging energy.
In 1967, the Arab League announced the 3 no's: no peace, no recognition, no negotiations. With all of Israel's enemies mobilizing against it, Israel launched a preemptive strike on the Egyptian Air Force, inaugurating the 1967 Six-Day War. This ended with Israel gaining miraculously the Sinai Desert, the Golan Heights, the Gaza Strip, Judea and Samaria, now known as the West Bank, as well as the entirety of Jerusalem. In 1973, the Arabs launched all-out war again, this time on Yom Kippur. Israel survived and gained territory. In 1979, Israel gave the Sinai back to Egypt in return for peace. In 1993, Israel agreed to the Oslo Accords, which promised a step-by-step process to establish a Palestinian state. In 1998, Israel conceded yet more territory to the Palestinian Authority under the prime ministership of Benjamin Netanyahu. In 2000, Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak offered Yasser Arafat, the terrorist leader of the Palestinian Authority, 91% control over the West Bank in contiguous territory and an Israeli security presence along 15% of the border with Jordan. Arafat walked away from the table and began the Second Intifada, a massive terror wave that ended with the death of thousands of Jews. In 2005, Israel unilaterally withdrew from the Gaza Strip. Hamas immediately took it over and began using it as a base for terrorist activity. That continues until this day. In 2008, Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert offered even more than Barak in terms of territory, with some land swaps to maintain Jewish-populated areas in exchange for some Israeli territory. Olmert even offered to relinquish Israeli sovereignty at the Temple Mount, the holiest site in Judaism, as well as the entire Old City of Jerusalem to a 5-member, non-sovereign international trusteeship comprising Israel, the PA, Jordan, the US, and Saudi Arabia. PA head Mahmoud Abbas walked away without a counteroffer.
Why? I mean, you could play that again and again and again, and if you really have the facts right, you'll see Israel's saying, we'll give you land, we'll trade with you, we'll do whatever you want, just for peace. Let's peacefully coexist. Mm-hmm. And what we know now is that if Hezbollah and if Hamas are funded and run by Iran. And Iran is the head of the snake. Iran, you know, we've heard the word proxy wars. I don't think we understand in America. We're probably all getting a civic education we never really comprehended before. The proxy war means you have Iran at war with Israel through other agencies. So as long as Hezbollah and Hamas are funded and led by Iran, that they become, this is the reason why you never saw a resolution, you never saw peace. You can't have peace because they didn't really have the authority to negotiate peace. Iran wants Israel wiped off the map. It's a satanic, bizarre, it's like the spirit of Haman that wanted to annihilate all the Jews in Iran back in the days of Esther. You have the same spirit at work now. They just simply want to destroy the Jews. But there's a curious prophetic kind of coincidence. 1973 is October 6th, Yom Kippur War. It's exactly 50 years after that. It's unusual to me. Like, remember when we had this terror attack that hit us on the anniversary of 9/11? Mm-hmm. And nobody in the State Department was expecting that they would do something on the anniversary. I think we ought to really look at these dates and be really understanding. There's a reason why on the anniversary of 9/11 you need to be vigilant. Because on the anniversary of the Jubilee, the 50th year Jubilee cycle of the Yom Kippur War of 1973, October 6th, Hamas, it's like a spirit decides that's the day. It's the high holy day. It's you could say the crescendo of this sacred feast, the third feast of Israel, Passover, Pentecost. It's in the Bible. And then Tabernacles. Mm-hmm. Tabernacles' final day is where the Jewish people celebrate the law. Now, if I really wanted to get people upset, which I can't help but do with 4 minutes left, I would say these feasts are actual spiritual appointments with God. That the Passover is a real feast. Old Testament fulfilled with the Jews leaving Egypt. New Testament fulfilled with Jesus saying, this is my body, this is my blood. Dying on Passover, he is the Lamb of God who would shed his blood for the sins of the world. And this is the Christian theology. It's Jesus' fulfillment historically during Passover, his trial, his crucifixion. Then you have the day of Pentecost, the Feast of Pentecost following 10 days later, which is the Feast of Harvest, the feast of the first wave of harvest for Israel after Passover. And 10 days later, the Spirit of God comes down in the upper room in Jerusalem. This is a historic, documentation called the Book of Acts. You see it. The Spirit of God poured out on the day of Pentecost. And there's some, I guess it's like 500 billion Pentecostals in the earth today. People that have experienced the Passover new birth and Pentecost, their own version of that upper room experience, subsequent after their conversion. That's 500 million testimonies to that fact globally. The unfulfilled feast is Tabernacles. What's the significance of that? It hasn't happened yet. In the Old Testament, it was the feast of the harvest when you have the September, October time, when you have the end of the year, but this is the time of the bounty harvest. That harvest is going to sustain you through the winter. The harvest, Jesus said this, the harvest is the end of the world. Interesting statement. Meaning the Tabernacles is the feast that corresponds with the final harvest of souls and nations coming in the sweep of the gospel. The third great unfulfilled feast is about to be fulfilled, and it's an end-time feast when nations and people come in. Strikes me as interesting that it was on that feast, the last day, that Hamas strikes, because I believe that in a spiritual sense, it is hell's way of trying to disrupt the final feast of the ingathering of a harvest, or the gospel going forth to the ends of the world. Jesus did say this, the one sign of the end wouldn't be Israel. It wouldn't even be the Antichrist. For those of you that are Christians out there, what is the one sign of the end? Jesus said, in the sign of the end, this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world, and then shall the end come. I believe that it's Satan's desire to disrupt God's plan or timing for harvest and embroil the world in war. so that you have a period of wars, rumors of wars, cycles of wars and conflicts that accelerate and accelerate, so disrupting the ability of this harvest to happen. And I will equally say that I believe that the great crisis of Christianity right now in the West is whether this great nation, the United States, the only one standing with Israel right now, the only one standing on the wings of Israel, this times of the Gentiles coming to an end suggests to me the period of the decline of the United States is the great Gentile superpower whose economic and military capacity can project itself as a restraining force to global anarchy. When Trump was there, you saw him restraining Putin. You saw him restraining China. You saw him restraining Iran. You saw him bringing about the Abraham Accords. You saw him striking Soleimani. You have an unusual character in history, which for me explains why any unregenerate mind hates him, because he somehow he was a restraining force on anarchy. If Trump is enabled to come back into office, I believe it'll be America's last hour where it will occupy a restraining force to the pent-up energies of global anarchy and meltdown. And I think that the 48 months that represent Trump's administration, should he be in office, is going to be the time of the most intense harvest activity that Americans are going to freely be able to participate in globally. Because following that, unless America has a pivot in a new direction, its economic and military sufficiency is going to be sorely crippled, and it could happen sooner, depending on our response. Go to lancewallnau.com/podcast. We do this every day, and I don't want you to miss any of it. God bless you.
Did you enjoy this latest episode? Please remember to share it with your friends, because the more knowledge you have, the better equipped you are to navigate the world.